by the party opposite. As we prepare for our future outside the EU, we cannot rest on our past achievements. We must focus relentlessly on keeping Britain at the cutting edge of the global economy. The deficit is down, but debt is still too high. Employment is up, but productivity remains stubbornly low. Too many of our young people are leaving formal education without the skills they need for today's labour market. And too many families are still feeling the squeeze, almost a decade after the crash. So our job is not done. And our task today is to take the next steps in preparing Britain for a global future, to equip our young people with the skills they need, to support our public services, and to help ordinary working families as we build an economy that works for everyone. Just as a strong economy requires a tax system that is competitive, a strong society requires one that is fair. And because I've committed to funding my spending decisions in this budget, rather than borrowing more, I make no apology for raising additional revenues and for doing so in ways which enhance the fairness of the system. First and foremost, that means collecting the taxes that are due. Since 2010, we've secured £140 billion in additional tax revenue by taking robust action to tackle avoidance, evasion and non-compliance. These actions have helped the UK achieve one of the lowest tax gaps in the world. But there is more that we can do. In this budget, we set out further actions to stop businesses from converting capital losses into trading losses, to tackle abuse of foreign pension schemes, to introduce UK VAT on roaming telecoms outside the EU in line with international standard practice, and from July we will introduce a tough new financial penalty for professionals who enable a tax avoidance arrangement that is later defeated by HMRC. Taken together, these measures will raise £820 million over the forecast period. But, Mr Deputy Speaker, as well as collecting taxes that are due, a fair system ensures that those with the broadest shoulders bear the heaviest burden. As a result of the changes we have made since 2010, the top 1% of income tax payers now pay 27% of all income tax, a higher proportion than in any year under the last Labour government. But a fair system will also ensure fairness between individuals, so that people doing similar work for similar wages and enjoying similar state benefits pay similar levels of tax. As our economy responds to the challenges of globalisation, shifts in demographics and the emergence of new technologies, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of people working as self-employed or through their own companies. Indeed, many of our most highly paid professionals work through limited liability partnerships and are treated as self-employed. There are many good reasons for choosing to be self-employed or working through a company. Indeed, Mr Deputy Speaker, I have done both in my time. And I will always encourage and support the entrepreneurs and the innovators who are the lifeblood of our economy. People should have choices about how they work, but those choices should not be driven primarily by differences in tax treatment. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, has asked Matthew Taylor, Chief Executive of the RSA, to consider the wider implications of different employment practices. And I look forward to his final report in the summer, and I'm grateful to him for sharing his preliminary thoughts. He is clear that differences in tax treatment are a key driver behind the trends we're observing, a conclusion which is shared by the IFS and the Resolution Foundation. An employee earning £32,000 will incur between him and his employer £6,170 of national insurance contributions. A self-employed person earning the equivalent amount will pay just £2,300, significantly less than half as much. Historically, the differences in NICs between those in employment and the self-employed reflected differences in state pension entitlement and contributory welfare benefits. But with the introduction of the new state pension last year, these differences have been very substantially reduced. Self-employed workers now build up the same entitlement to the state pension as employees, a big pension boost for the self-employed. The most significant remaining area of difference is in relation to parental benefits, and I can announce today that we will consult in the summer on options to address the disparities in this area, as the FSB and others have proposed. Mr Deputy Speaker, the difference in national insurance contributions is no longer justified by the difference in benefit entitlements. Such dramatically different treatment of two people earning essentially the same undermines the fairness of our tax system. Employed and self-employed alike use our public services in the same way, but they are not paying for them in the same way. The lower national insurance...
All right, thank you for joining us on the program and welcome back. On the show today to discuss the budget delivered by Philip Hammond, we just saw there, and the rift that the issue of the national insurance contribution has actually created in the government. This morning it was revealed that the Prime Minister, Theresa May, had actually denied that insertion of the NI contribution hike, saying that that was smuggled into the budget that was on the paper by stated by some of the heads of the Prime Minister this morning. Joining me now to discuss this issue of the budget and the NI increment is Tina Buckley. Tina, thanks for joining us on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
And Sam Foxman, thank you for being part of the program today.
Thanks for having me today.
All right, Tina, let me start with you. Being fair to the government, isn't it right for NI to be increased?
When you start off with a manifesto saying you were not going to do that, and your first budget you break that, I think it's a grave error, and I think they're going to pay...
manifesto?
The Tory manifesto, David Cameron's manifesto, and Theresa May is carrying on.
But they have said that they have not broken any manifesto, that a lot has happened from the time of that campaign and now, and if there's a need for a change, that should be right.
But you get your votes on the manifesto you set out. So they've set out what they wanted in their manifesto. People have voted on what they thought was going to be right for them, and they've backtracked, and this is a grave error. Even David Cameron, lip readers, said that he believes it's an error of judgment, that they shouldn't have done this. And that's their own former Prime Minister.
Sam, generally on the whole, looking at the budget, what were your thoughts? Plus the NI debacle and other issues.
Well, the national insurance issue is, there is no doubt that they have broken a manifesto promise. One of the interesting questions is whether when they decided to do this, they remembered that they'd made that promise in the first place, because it's not at all clear that there was ever a discussion at cabinet level where anyone indicated that they knew that they'd made this promise in their manifesto. But they clearly have broken that promise, and they ought to be bound by their manifesto, because however, if the argument is so much has changed that we need to be using different policies to address the issues that we're facing, then the only constitutional way for the government to approach that is to call a general election and put a new manifesto to the people. There is a question as to whether they'd be able to call a general election, because it would require, I think, a 2/3 majority of MPs to call that general election. It's not clear if Labour wants a general election to happen, and it's not clear if it's in anyone's interest, apart from maybe the Lib Dems, for a general election to take place. So it's possible that they wouldn't get the votes. But certainly you don't just get to abandon your manifesto because you want to. Having said that, people do all the time abandon their manifesto, and in that context, as manifesto breaks go, this one is fairly benign. It's not the worst decision that a government has ever taken. It's relatively more fair. It's surprising that there's been so much opposition to it on the left
Well,
when...
Why do you say it's a little bit fair?
Well, because the way that self-employment is used, the reason that self-employment is exploding in this country is because of the growth of the so-called gig economy, which is an exercise in essentially claiming that your employees are not really your employees so that they get more favourable tax treatment. Now, there is a job to be done in pointing out that people who are employed by Uber, for example, are transparently employed by Uber, and it is simply false to assert otherwise. But if you're, in addition to doing that, you might as well reduce the incentives for people to create these artificial structures. And one of the ways you would reduce those incentives is by equalising the tax treatment, or relatively equalising the tax treatment. The other thing is, now self-employed people now receive benefits from the state that are very similar to the benefits that employed people receive. They're basically indistinguishable. And even under this new regime, self-employed people will still pay significantly less tax than employed people earning the same amount of money. And those people who are self-employed and earning the least amount of money will now pay less in tax. So I think it's actually a very progressive measure. Having said all that, again, my last point would be it's not a very conservative measure, because, and I think that's a lot of the reason that conservatives are upset about it, because basically the government's argument is, yes, you are paying more tax, but you are also getting more from the government. Well, that's the Labour Party. The Conservative Party is, we will reduce the amount of tax you pay and we will give you less. So there's a line of argument that while it's not necessarily a bad policy, it's certainly not a very Tory one.
Do you agree with Sam? That's not a bad policy. It's not a Tory one.
I agree with what he's saying, but you have a load of self-employed people that have voted Tory, and they're up in arms about it, and I think they're going to lose votes on this, which will be a good thing for the country.
But how much of damage is this doing to the self-employed people? The Prime Minister said, look, the Chancellor said, look, this is unfair. What people in employment and self-employment pay is not balanced. Let's raise what people in self-employment pay a little bit, and then make it balanced to what people in paid job pay, so that there is equal treatment.
Okay,
Is anything wrong in that?
I don't see anything wrong with that, but if you have to tackle unfairness in the economy and in the social care and everything, you have to tackle all of it. So if you're tackling it at the bottom end of the scale with people paying, self-employed people paying less tax than employed people, then you have to look at the top of the scale and look at corporations paying hardly any tax. So I'm in favour of people paying as much tax as the country needs, but fairness, and you need fairness at the bottom end and you need it at the top, and the inequity has just gone way. When you have leaders of corporations earning 500 times more than your average worker, 20 years ago that was something like maybe 100 times. The inequity is wrong, so we need people to pay the right amount of tax at the lower end and at the top end.
Do you agree with that? That the level of inequity is quite high, and the government can be blamed for that?
Yeah,
Labour has always held the position that the government, the Conservative Party, is giving more to the rich and taking more from the less privileged.
I think tax fairness is obviously important as a principle, and if you accept that it's important as a principle, which I think everyone here does, then you have to apply it from the top of the tax system all the way down to the bottom of the tax system. One thing I would say, though, is that it's not necessarily fair to say that people who are self-employed, people who are genuinely self-employed, should pay the same amount in tax as someone who is employed by a company, because someone who is self-employed is taking a degree of risk that people elsewhere are not necessarily, and so where people are genuinely self-employed, it makes sense for them to have a lower tax burden. It doesn't necessarily need to be as much lower as it has been in the past. Maybe the current level is about right. Where the level should be is something that I think could be up for debate. But but it's not fair that they be treated equally. The only reason it seems like it will be fair to treat them equally is because of the way that companies are creating this pseudo self-employed status to get out of, particularly to get out of the employer's contribution in national insurance, which is another significant cost in employing someone. So that's sort of just on a point of fairness.
Shouldn't the government take a different policy approach to dealing with this pseudo system?
Yes.
Where companies create that kind of a system, and then just to avoid paying certain level of tax and insurance, shouldn't the government look at a different policy approach rather than raising national insurance contributions?
Yeah.
Well, yes, but I think it's part of a process. So you have a system where it is too easy to pretend that someone is self-employed when they are not, and a system where the advantages of pretending to be self-employed are significant. So the two steps you would take in tackling that are, firstly, to make it harder to pretend that someone is self-employed when they're not, and secondly, to reduce the advantage of self-employment. So you make it harder and you make it less valuable to the companies to do it.
Yeah.
And this is step B. I'm not necessarily. I think that the government, from my understanding of the situation, as far as I can tell, the government is depending on the courts to address part A of that, which they are to a great extent. You know, there are a number of judgments that have come out where people who were classed as self-employed by the businesses they were working for, in fact, qualified for a number of protections as employees. So that is a thing that is a direction of travel that's happening, not through legislation, but through the application of already existing legislation by the courts.
Tina, the Labour Party, if the Labour Party were not to be in crisis, this would have been an opportunity for them to call for a snap election.
Absolutely, it's a perfect opportunity, and we need to unite the party, and we need to stop members, MPs within the party trying to destroy our leader again. We need a strong opposition. Any government needs a strong opposition, and I believe...
And the problem people have said is that the Labour Party is actually not offering a very strong opposition.
You think they're offering?
That's what people are saying.
That they are offering, they're not offering.
Not giving strong opposition.
Well, within a party, I equate it to a family. You need to keep your rows within the party and present a united front. Jeremy has supporters, but he also has detractors within his PLP, and I would say we need to get rid of these people. I was talking to a few members of Parliament last week at the WASPI March, where the government have taken ladies working in the 1950s, that some of them are 50 grand up to 80 grand worse off with their pension, their state pension. So I was talking to a few Labour MPs at that march, and they're still saying that Jeremy's not their leader. So they need to get behind their leader, and we need to have a stronger opposition. Jeremy's got great policies, but he needs to get rid of these people, and then
how does it? And this is the argument. This is the issue with some of the PLP, with some of the supporters of Jeremy Corbyn. That some of the supporters are becoming very, very aggressive, calling for their ouster, calling for their being delisted, or being deselected.
Yeah, and I would agree with that.
Why? Because
you can't have people here. You have a manager, you have a director. If your employees are completely plotting against you the whole time, would you keep those employees in your corporation?
Is it the same? These are individuals elected on the basis of their trust and relationship by their constituents.
Yeah, and we have...
So if their constituents believe in them, why would the party leader or the party deselect them?
Because they're not supporting their leader, and some of these MPs aren't even supporting the the people that have voted them in. Some of them are just career politicians, and we need to get away from career politicians and get back to conviction politicians. Jeremy's a conviction politician, and many of his strongest supporters are conviction politicians, but there are many in this Labour Party that are there for the career. If the money was more on the Tory side, they would jump ship today. And we want to get rid of these people. We need people who are there to address the inequality in society. People are dying under this government every day, and that's not a fallacy. People are dying. Walk around the streets of London. How many people are on the streets now? These are ex-servicemen. These are men that might have, their marriages have broken down. Society's not working. We have big corporations like Uber employing people as self-employed when they're not self-employed. So we need to address all this inequality, and we need a strong opposition. We need to get rid of the detractors.
Strong opposition.
A strong opposition.
Which is what Labour is accused of not delivering.
As I was saying, because he has people in his PLP who will never, ever accept him as the Labour leader.
Sir, what do you think is wrong between the leader and his PLP, parliamentary party members?
It's a good quote. I forget exactly from whom, from the Labour Party of the 1960s, which went through similar sorts of upheaval, who says that basically regardless of, well, even if you disagree with the direction the boat's going, you're better off not capsizing it. And I think there's an element of the reason that the biggest obstacle to a Labour government, and oppositions can only really be effective if they are genuine governments in waiting, and the thing that stands between the Labour Party and being a government or a government in waiting is that they are disunited. You'll remember, Tunde, that when Jeremy Corbyn was first elected leader of the party, I came on this show and we talked for about an hour about what Jeremy Corbyn's election might mean for the party, and what I said then, and this is where I disagree with you on deselection and things like that, because what I said then was, if Jeremy Corbyn can seize the momentum, no pun intended, that has taken him into be leader of the party, and can rally and unite the party, and can construct a vision that can bring people together and can build bridges between the senior members of his party and between the wider membership, the enormous wider membership of his party, then even if, because of, for example, the opposition of the media to Jeremy Corbyn, even if he cannot become Prime Minister, he can still construct a party, a united party, that will be able to set out more left-wing policies of the sort that his supporters really, really want. So, I agree with you that disunity is a problem. I don't think that threatening people with, especially if they are truly careerists, I don't think threatening them with taking their careers away is necessarily the best way to bring them into the tent. A lot of the reason that these people are, especially again the careerists, are in opposition to Jeremy Corbyn is because they're worried if Corbyn remains leader, they will lose their jobs. Yeah. And so I think there's a job to be done within the leadership in building that consensus and constructing a narrative that everyone in the Labour Party can get behind.
Sam,
from right to left.
Let me quickly ask you. You said if Jeremy Corbyn, seizes the momentum to rally the party, the leaders, the supporters. But what if in terms of policy, they are far apart? Jeremy Corbyn is far left, very known for that, and many of his PLP are centre left.
Centre. Not centre left, centre right.
Probably. They are neither to the left nor to the right. So, the then former Prime Minister of the Labour Party,
like Tony Blair.
Tony Blair.
I don't think
many of them are Blair supporters?
I don't think there are an enormous number of Blairites left in the Labour Party, if we're going to be realistic. There are a lot of people who are to the right of Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes,
but
and he's to the left.
That's not a marker of anything. He's enormously far to the left. Even in Labour Party terms, he's quite far to the left.
I don't think you can ever be too far left. I'm sure you can be too far right.
Well, you can certainly be too far right, and I would suggest that there are some 20th century examples of people being too far left, but Jeremy Corbyn, wherever he is in the party, wherever any leader of a party is in a party, they are leading a coalition, and the essential skill that they need is to build a coalition. The issue with your strategy, even if the strategy you recommend would lead to a more united party, the consequence of making the centre of Labour further to the political left, in broad terms, narrowing the size of Labour's church, narrows the potential electoral base for the Labour Party and makes it less likely that there will be a Labour Party. And I am absolutely certain that your sort of end game objective is not that we have 20 years of Conservative government.
No, absolutely.
So that's where
So where does Labour go from here? Now, because it's looking, every single day is looking difficult for Jeremy Corbyn and Labour Party.
Every day is difficult, of course. This man has won 2 elections as leader, and the last one an even bigger mandate than before. He has over 650,000 supportive members.
But people that will elect him into office as Prime Minister, the Labour Party seems to be losing ground. Say, for instance, take a look at Copeland. I mean, the by-elections, Labour has been there for 8 centuries now. And they lost that to...
They lost that, but Labour have been losing votes.
That was due to the policy of Jeremy Corbyn of not supporting nuclear program. And that was a nuclear constituency.
Of course, because that they've got lots of jobs, and I understand that. But when you have a society that is failing, do we want to spend billions on nuclear weapons? Do we want to spend billions on nuclear weapons when society is failing? I don't. I certainly don't. But I appreciate there are jobs up there, but Labour have been losing votes on every election. So this isn't the greatest Tory victory for them to have won that seat. I admit we've lost that seat, but we won Stoke.
Okay. If you were to be advising Jeremy Corbyn, would you prefer Jeremy Corbyn remains as leader of the party and loses the general election, or he steps down and Labour wins the election? How would you prefer?
I would never advocate Jeremy stepping down. Okay, if there was anyone to fill Jeremy's shoes and Labour were to win this election, I would go for it. But there is no one fit to lace Jeremy's shoes at the moment. We've had stalking horses. We've had Dan Jarvis. He had hedge funds supporting him. Where is he? They're saying that Clive Lewis wants to take over and fill Jeremy's shoes. This is whipped up just to divide and to just cause disruption, as much disruption. Clive Lewis is a Jeremy supporter. He's not doing any of this. We need to get rid of these. What is the point of keeping these people?
You keep saying get rid of this.
I'm talking. Okay.
Get rid of them. How will go with Sam saying, look, let's unite them.
How do we unite them when they don't want to be united?
Sam did say the greatest strength of a leader is merging and marrying the coalition. You cannot find the same party people who will always buy your head.
I understand that.
The leader is to carry everybody along.
Absolutely, but when you have people within your government, within your party that will never accept you, how do you unite them?
No matter what you do.
No matter what you do, this man works every day. If you followed this man 1 week in his life around the country, you see this love that this man engenders. How many other politicians have young people turning up, old people turning up, and just having the passion to believe that this man wants to make the country better?
So are you convinced that Jeremy Corbyn has the potential to win an election.
Absolutely,
Minister.
absolutely. If he can get these people on board,
And you've just
absolutely.
said, some of them have said they will never.
They will never be on board. So I agree with deselection, and we need to get grassroots people in that have the same objectives. I don't believe these people's objectives are good.
Sam, is the Labour Party anywhere close to government?
No, but I don't think it matters that Jeremy Corbyn's the leader. I don't think it matters either way in terms of whether the Labour Party could be in government. You know, the thing that's interesting, people who engage intensely with politics think of politics as being
the way Tina does.
think of politics as being very short term, whereas most people don't engage so much, and most people have much longer perspectives. Tony Blair is one of the most unpopular politicians now in the history of this nation, and he is more intimately associated with the Labour Party for most people than Jeremy Corbyn is. So yes, people are rejecting Labour, but they're not rejecting Labour because of Jeremy Corbyn. They're rejecting Labour because for 13 years Labour didn't do the sorts of things that people were expecting it to do. And so I think that's an issue. I don't think there's any realistic prospect. I mean, I'm fully prepared to be wrong, because I'm sure that you invited me on here to talk about Trump and Hillary Clinton at one point, and I'm sure I will have said very similar things about that. But I would be very surprised if Jeremy Corbyn was able to form a government, or even if he was the largest party. I don't think it's realistic. On your point, I think a lot of
You don't think it's realistic? So,
no, but I
you
don't
did
think
say that the problem is not actually Jeremy Corbyn, it's Labour Party.
it's the Labour Party. The next,
So with the level of cuts and what people are feeling, and you said Labour is not anywhere near being
no,
a government.
no leader.
Sure.
No leader, even if they had selected a different leader in 2015 and had a pool of anyone who was available from even from the history of Labour, even if they could have picked Clem Attlee in the 2015 leadership election, they would lose the general election in 2020.
Despite the
Just because of all sorts of things, because of the demographics, because they don't have a clear message on Brexit, because they're an inherently divided party in so many different ways. The coalition that underpins Labour is fractured, and it needs to be reconstructed if the party's going to have any long-term electoral success. The thing that's interesting about Jeremy Corbyn in that context is that I think a lot of the reason that a lot of the parliamentary people are so in opposition to Jeremy Corbyn, a lot of the right wing of the Labour Party are so in opposition to Jeremy Corbyn, actually comes down less to the psychology of we can never have someone who's left wing, and more to the psychology of we used to be in charge here and now we're angry that we're not the ones in charge anymore. Mm-hmm. And so I suppose there's a part of me that thinks we'll have 5 years of Jeremy Corbyn, 5 years of them crying and screaming. Corbyn will lose the 2020 election. If he's got any sense, he'll stand down as leader of the party. In 2020, there will be a leadership election in the Labour Party. Someone else from the left will become leader, a different character, perhaps someone younger, or perhaps someone from the sort of Corbyn tier. And hopefully at that point, the right of the Labour Party will recognise that they are living in a new paradigm in terms of leadership within the party, and they will either fall in line or go off to become Conservatives or Lib Dems.
That would be preferable. That would be preferable. Admit it now, for the country.
Tina, I mean, if you take a look at Sam's strategic analysis of Labour, that's some kind of damning result.
It is damning. But Sam's young. He's not voted in as many elections as I have.
Isn't about age? It's not about age.
Let's talk again in 10 more years.
I mean, if you take, so many things. From his analysis, look, one of the areas Labour does have strong goal used to be Scotland. Scotland is heart of Labour now.
Yeah.
So Labour has lost a great chunk of its vote with Scotland going to SNP.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So that's huge vote you've lost.
Of course
there.
it is. Of course
so
it
where
is.
are you going to get the vote that you've lost from Scotland? Where are you going to get that back?
We've got a lot of
England.
work to do. We've got a huge amount to do. I don't deny it. It's a big battle.
So does it sound real to you, the picture that Sam has created, that it doesn't matter, maybe it's Jeremy Corbyn or not?
But it's
Labour.
also, it's not a Scotland question. It's not. Scotland is a microcosm of a
Yeah.
lot of the problems that National Labour's facing.
Yeah.
But every general election that Labour won, 97, 2001, 2005, each of those elections would have been won
Anyway.
anyway without the Scottish vote. The problem of Labour is a problem nationwide. It's a problem of English Labour as much as it's a problem of Scottish Labour. It is the same problem though, because one of the reasons that Labour's losing support to, for example, the Liberal Democrats, is because Labour can't take a position on Brexit because it doesn't know what it thinks. There are lots of different views.
Lots of people have gone to UKIP more than Lib Dems.
People have gone UKIP. It very much depends on what part of the country you're in, because obviously there were more members of the Labour Party in Richmond than voted for the Labour candidate in the Richmond by-election. So the Liberals have that clear position on Brexit, as to UKIP, incidentally. So the most important English political issue of the day, they've taken aside. Similarly, the problem, Labour are now polling behind the Conservatives in Scotland, and a big part of the reason for that is that Labour are equivocal on the question of the Union. It's the biggest question in Scottish politics. The SNP want to break Scotland away. The Conservative Party very much want to keep Scotland part of the Union. The Labour Party ostensibly want to keep it in the Union, but in a kind of vague and equivocal way. And I think that's the part. It's to do with the way that the electoral base is fracturing, but the consequence of the electoral base fracturing means that as a Labour politician, you have to say too many different things to appeal to too many different sorts of people. You know, how do you motivate Brexit voting people in the North East, and also Remain voting people in London? That's your coalition. What do you unite them on? And they have some things in common, but a lot of them are very different. Working people in London find it very difficult to afford property. If you have a decent job in the North East, finding property is not the issue you have. The issue you have is that your income doesn't match your cost of living otherwise. Yeah. So there are so many there has been enormous divergence between the various interests.
If you were to be advising the Labour Party, what would you be saying? Thank God you got one of the closest allies in Kirby City. Probably she might take your advice to him.
It's very hard to know. You know, it's very easy to be a critic. Very easy to be a critic. And I suppose that my analysis is sound, so I guess my advice would be don't waste too much money fighting 2020. But I can see that's not necessarily the most constructive piece of advice. I think.
But what if there is the Trump repeat in the UK? Nobody ever gave Trump any inch of doubt in America. He was in the choice of the media. He was in the choice of the system.
Hillary.
He was nowhere. Hillary Clinton was. Everything was.
It was lined up for Hillary.
Yeah, lined up for Hillary. What if I'm sure, Tina, probably Labour is waiting on a repeat of Trump in the UK.
Yeah, and it will happen. It will happen, Tunde.
Do you see that happening? Do you see
the
electoral system in the UK working the same way as that of America?
The last time a governing party won a by-election seat from an opposition, that government was returned in a landslide. The Copeland result, for all that it can be attributed to certain specific factors, is the single worst electoral result by any political entity in the United Kingdom for as long as there has been universal suffrage. For as long as everyone has had the vote, no one has ever done as badly electorally as Labour did in Copeland. So I would like to be able to join you in optimism, but I can't see that it's founded in anything, because that is the worst result in the history of British politics.
Can I just address that, Tunde? Okay, and the alternative we have is to live under these great austerity cuts that everyone is suffering, not just poor people or working class people, even middle class people are suffering under austerity. Cuts to the NHS, cuts to mental health, cuts to social care, cut. They've cut so far to the bone. How much more can we cut? We can't cut any more.
If you accuse the government of cutting and the people keep voting the government, the party.
Yeah.
So what do you say?
We need to fight the mass media onslaught. There's a lot of media out there that are reporting stuff, and the news isn't the news. We have people sitting down, eating their dinner every night with... Can I name the BBC?
No.
No, I can't name the BBC.
Yeah,
MSN, but I've mentioned it. I apologise. I didn't say the BBC. The mass media, the newspapers, the news channels coming into your rooms every day. Can I say it's propaganda? No, I can't say that either. But we are being bombarded with information. That information needs to be deciphered. When we have an education system that is failing the many and working for the few, how can we, as people with limited education, decipher what is true and what is not true? This is why these vile people are getting voted in time and time again. We can't have another government. If there's another government, Tory government, then I don't want to be here. I don't want to be here. And God help us.
Sam, do we see the chances of a coalition?
For Labour?
I mean, not a party winning outright majority.
Yeah. I'd have thought the Conservatives would win an outright majority in 2020. It is, like, I don't, it's not like...
Do you see the Conservative winning outright? Did you say possible? Winning outright?
Outright.
Outright majority. 2020?
2020, or possibly sooner if they decide to go to the country sooner.
You believe they can win outright majority?
Yeah, I'd have thought, well, they've got a majority now of about 4. I would have thought they would significantly increase that if they went to the country now. Which isn't to say that I don't completely understand where you're coming from with this, and I'm on board with the idea that there should be a strong opposition and that it should be potentially a government, and too long focusing on a particular ideological set of objectives, in this case austerity, is probably going to be bad for the nation, and at some point there is going to need to be a pivot away from austerity, and away from cuts, and away from all of the things that come with it. Even if right now you think that cuts are a good thing, which they are not, but even if you think they are a good thing now, at some point you've got to recognise that there will be a need to pivot away from them. The Labour Party is not currently set up in such a way that it can address people's concerns in these areas, and I think what it needs to do, I suppose, to go back to your question of what would my advice be, if the Labour Party wants to win 2020, which isn't completely impossible, it has to construct a narrative that is credible, which it has so far failed to do.
All right, gentlemen, thanks a lot. Oh, gentlemen
and women.
Lady. Thanks a lot for joining us on the program. Tina, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Being there every time we call on you. Hassan, you've been very wonderful. You've been fantastic.
Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for always taking your time to fly to London every time we call on you without any financial support from us.
Oh,
Thank you for taking your time out.
All
Did
right.
I just hear you say what? All right, Sam, thanks for coming on the show again.
Thanks,
Tina, thanks for coming on the show.
you.
My name is Tunde Alabi. It's been a pleasure having you guys on the program today. Let's quickly run to our newsroom as we bring you what really made the news last week. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye. Focus on the program is to review and discuss issues around the diaspora community in the UK. The program offers you that unrestricted voice on issues affecting you in the UK.